the sun beat down on the parched earth of a nameless Arizona territory, turning the air into a shimmering, cruel mirror. Across this unforgiving canvas rode Blondie, known only by the pale dust that perpetually clung to his duster and the cool, calculated gaze behind his poncho. He was a scavenger of men, a bounty hunter whose moral compass, though present, was perpetually tilted toward the magnetic pull of profit. His latest quarry was a loudmouth drunkard named Pedro, currently trussed up and sweating profusely in the back of a dilapidated stagecoach Blondie had commandeered. Blondie didn't relish the delivery of the man, but the $500 reward meant 3 months of quiet living and good whiskey. He rode into the settlement of San Miguel, a place built on the promise of silver that never materialized, now subsisting on vice and fear. As he dismounted outside the sheriff's office, a sudden, piercing shriek cut through the midday heat. It was not Pedro's. It was the sound of a pistol firing in the saloon across the street, followed by the heavy, sickening thud of a body hitting the boardwalk. Blondie instinctively drew his Colt Navy, the motion fluid and practiced, but before he could cross the street, another figure burst from the swinging doors. This was Angel Eyes, a man whose face was a study in cold, economic violence. He was no drunkard, no loudmouth. He was a machine of execution, a cleaner whose services were paid for in blood and whose conscience was long since incinerated. Angel Eyes surveyed the street with detached boredom, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, locking onto Blondie for a split second of mutual appraisal before he spat on the ground and began to walk away, his boots crushing the dirt into finer powder. Blondie, momentarily frozen by the sheer, unadulterated menace of the man, registered that Angel Eyes had just collected a different kind of bounty, a permanent one, and had no desire to linger. The air crackled with a silent, primal challenge between the two gunfighters, one driven by a tenuous moral structure, the other by pure, ruthless self-interest. Blondie collected his money for Pedro, the crisp bills feeling insignificant after the encounter. He knew the type. Angel Eyes was a storm cloud on the horizon, an omen of inevitable trouble. He bought supplies, replenished his whiskey flask, and rode out, the image of Angel Eyes' impassive cruelty burned into his mind. He headed north, intending to put distance between himself and San Miguel's sour memory. But fate, as it often does in the desert, had already laid a trap for him. Hours later, while making camp, he noticed a solitary rider approaching at a desperate pace, urging a spent horse across the brutal terrain. As the rider drew closer, Blondie recognized the frantic, wild look in his eyes. He was running from the law. This man was short, barrel-chested, draped in filthy clothes, and radiating an almost manic energy. This was Tuco Benedicto Pacifico Juan Maria Ramirez, the ugly, a fast-talking rogue, wanted in at least 5 counties for crimes ranging from petty theft to grand larceny. And he was riding straight into Blondie's perfectly laid snare. Tuco arrived in a cloud of dust and panic, nearly collapsing from the exhaustion of his ride. He stammered a frantic story about a posse on his trail, pleading for aid, his eyes darting everywhere, already searching for an escape route. Blondie simply sat by his small, crackling fire, his features obscured by the brim of his hat, offering a detached silence that amplified Tuco's fear. This was not a chance encounter, it was an audition. Blondie knew exactly who Tuco was, a perennial thorn in the side of law and order, a name always printed on wanted posters, always worth a decent sum. The bounty on Tuco's head was a handsome $2,000, a significant score. But Blondie saw more than just a reward. He saw a unique opportunity for a lucrative, repeatable scam. "They'll hang you for sure, friend," Blondie finally drawled, his voice a low, gravelly counterpoint to Tuco's high-strung nervousness. "But I can delay that appointment, for a price." Tuco, ever the opportunist, immediately caught the glint of something beyond simple capture in Blondie's eye. Their price became an infamous, traveling circus of con artistry. Blondie would capture Tuco, deliver him to a sheriff in a small town for the reward, only to ride up moments before the execution, dramatically sever the rope with a well-aimed rifle shot, and spirit Tuco away, narrowly escaping the enraged citizens. This cycle was a brutal, profitable ballet. Each town paid the bounty, believing they had finally rid themselves of the notorious outlaw, and each time, Tuco survived, returning only for his share of the take. In the dusty, forgotten town of Santa Fe, the ritual went awry. The local sheriff, a humorless man named Wallace, was not as easily fooled as the others. He had a premonition of the escape and had stationed a hidden squad of deputies on the outskirts of town. Blondie performed his spectacular rescue, the rope splitting with a whack just as Tuco's feet left the ground, but the subsequent escape was a desperate, chaotic sprint through the dusty streets under a hail of gunfire. They finally escaped into the desert, both men cursing and covered in grime, the adrenaline masking the growing, venomous resentment between them. The near-death experience, however, had crystallized a fatal flaw in their arrangement. The power dynamic was entirely in Blondie's hands. He controlled the gun, the rescues, and, most importantly, the money. Tuco, tired of being the bait, the nearly hanged punchline, began to nurse a savage, slow-burning hatred. As they rode deeper into the bleak, sun-scorched Badlands, Blondie, satisfied with their latest haul, carelessly mentioned a change in their contract. He needed a break. The next town was too dangerous, the posse too close. Tuco's eyes narrowed, seeing his share of the gold slipping away, and the final straw was laid. Their partnership, an unstable edifice built on mutual greed, was about to crumble under the weight of Tuco's volatile ego. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of violent orange and purple, Tuco smiled a predatory, chilling smile. Blondie, sitting with his back to the campfire, never saw the flash of the rusty revolver Tuco had managed to hide, nor the terrifying, victorious glint in the outlaw's eye as he raised it. The muzzle of Tuco's rusty revolver pressed hard against the back of Blondie's neck, the cold metal a shocking contrast to the warm night air. "No more cutting, Blondie," Tuco hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and triumph. This time, the rope stays cut, permanently. He disarmed Blondie with a practiced, rough urgency, throwing the bounty hunter's prized Colt Navy into the dark scrubland. The tables had turned with brutal speed. Tuco had had enough of the near hangings, the disrespect, and the paltry cut he received for risking his neck. His cunning, long suppressed by fear, had finally clawed its way to the surface. He wasn't interested in killing Blondie outright. A quick death was too kind. He wanted to inflict a punishment that mirrored his own suffering, the agony of the noose. Tuco marched Blondie deep into the hostile, trackless desert, forcing him to walk until his boots were shredded and his lips were cracked and bleeding. He reveled in Blondie's silent, suffering dignity, finding a perverse satisfaction in the decay of the bounty hunter's stoic composure. Days blurred into a single, agonizing stretch of sun, sand, and agonizing thirst. Tuco, mounted on his own horse, followed Blondie like a vulture, occasionally tossing him a drop of water, just enough to prolong the misery. He was savoring the revenge, letting the power flow through him like a heady, dark whiskey. He had finally mastered the good. But Tuco, in his greed and rage, had made a critical miscalculation. He had failed to kill Blondie, and in the Wild West, a man left alive is a man who will seek retribution. On the fourth day, Blondie, nearing the point of delirium, stumbled upon a derelict, abandoned stagecoach, its leather seats cracked and its wooden frame bleached white by the sun. He collapsed next to it, the heat and exhaustion blurring his vision. Suddenly, two figures emerged from the coach's dusty interior. They were not rescuers, but fellow outlaws, gang members loyal to Tuco who had tracked them for weeks, looking to intercept Blondie for an old, forgotten score. The outlaws, led by a man known only as Calamity, were surprised to find Blondie in such a pathetic state, but their intention was clear: revenge and a cut of whatever treasure Tuco had alluded to. Tuco, realizing his mistake, tried to assert his authority, demanding they respect his execution process. But Calamity and his men saw only weakness and a lack of control. They dismissed Tuco, tying him up and preparing to finish Blondie their own, far crueler way. It was a moment of supreme peril for both men. Just as Calamity raised his rifle, intending to end Blondie's suffering with a bullet to the head, a distant, muffled cannon fire echoed across the vast plain. The outlaws looked up, startled. Suddenly, another sound cut through the heat, the sharp, rhythmic drumming of cavalry drums. War had arrived in the desert, and with it, a chaos that would either save them or consume them entirely. The sound of the distant Civil War skirmish was a thunderous, terrifying orchestra, and it proved to be the unlikely salvation for the two antagonists. Calamity and his men, terrified of being caught between two warring armies, fled instantly, abandoning their prisoners. Tuco, tied and furious, began to curse until his throat was raw. Blondie, moments from death, managed to work the rope free on a piece of jagged metal from the broken stagecoach, his hands bleeding profusely. The first thing he did was not drink, but find a weapon. He retrieved a battered, broken canteen and, moving with the slow, deliberate care of a man facing certain death, stumbled toward the source of the cannon fire. He dragged the now freed but still weakened Tuco behind him, knowing the outlaw, for all his treachery, was a necessary evil. Blondie didn't help Tuco out of kindness, but out of calculation. He needed a horse and supplies, and Tuco, with his connections, was the fastest route to them. They crawled toward the sound, which led them not to a major battle, but to a small, isolated outpost converted into a Union field hospital, a pathetic, bloody tableau in the middle of the desert. The Union regiment was severely battered, their medic tent already overflowing. Near death, Blondie managed to corner Tuco's horse and supplies, securing a saddlebag filled with salvaged rations and 2 full canteens. Before he could make his escape, however, Tuco, ever the survivor, had a stroke of luck. He spotted a Union soldier staggering out of the makeshift hospital, raving in pain, his uniform soaked in blood. This soldier, Corporal Bill Carson, had a death grip on a heavy pouch. Tuco, acting on instinct, wrestled the pouch from the man, but before he could examine it, the soldier collapsed, whispering a secret name with his dying breath, Arch Stanton. Blondie, witnessing the exchange, immediately recognized the frantic, desperate look in the soldier's eyes. He knew the soldier had just passed on a secret of immense value. He rushed to the man, but it was too late. He grabbed the dying man's collar, demanding to know what he knew, but the man could only point vaguely toward a cemetery miles away. Tuco, meanwhile, was rifling through the soldier's pouch and finding it contained nothing but Confederate script and a few letters, not the gold he had immediately hoped for. Before Tuco could destroy the pouch in a fit of rage, Blondie, his thirst finally overcome by a surge of predatory intelligence, pointed his recovered revolver at Tuco's head. The name, Blondie rasped, his voice sandpaper dry. What was the name of the place or the person? Tell me, or the only gold you'll see is the sun going down on your last day. Tuco, believing the soldier's ravings were useless, mockingly provided the name of the man, Arch Stanton, claiming it was the dead man's final confession. Blondie, however, knew the dead soldier was Corporal Carson, and he knew a little bit about Carson's history with the Confederate supply trains. The pieces were beginning to align. An enormous fortune of hidden Confederate gold, stolen and buried, was at the heart of this desert chaos. Blondie, having secured the crucial, fragmented piece of information, the name Arch Stanton, knew he needed the second piece to unlock the location of the hidden fortune. He re-established his dominance over Tuco, but this time, the partnership was forged not just out of convenience, but out of necessity. Tuco knew the first name, Arch Stanton, and Blondie suspected the pouch contained the second, a cemetery's location or a landmark. They made a solemn, if utterly insincere, pact. They would travel together, find the gold, and split it. Immediately, they set out toward the Union Hospital to find a replacement for Tuco's fallen horse. But as they approached the smoldering outpost, a wave of cold dread washed over Blondie. The remaining Union soldiers were gone, and standing amidst the wreckage, surveying the scene with an almost surgical precision, was Angel Eyes. The ruthless hitman, having tracked the bounty scam from town to town, had arrived in search of Tuco and Blondie, convinced their traveling spectacle was a smokescreen for a much larger, more valuable operation. He had discovered Corporal Carson's connection to the stolen gold through a series of brutal, efficient interrogations in a nearby town, leaving a trail of broken men and shattered secrets. Angel Eyes, realizing the soldier was gone, had now connected Tuco's sudden, hasty flight from the army to the theft of the secret. He was a professional, an artist of pain and extraction, and he knew Tuco would be the weakest link. Tuco, seeing Angel Eyes, visibly shrank, recognizing the cold-blooded efficiency that Blondie had only glimpsed in San Miguel. This was not a man to be fooled or bargained with. This was pure, focused malice. Angel Eyes immediately seized control, his demeanor calm and his voice chillingly neutral. He had no patience for games. He dragged Tuco into a secluded, burned-out shack and began a cold, methodical interrogation. He knew the soldier had revealed a key part of the secret. He didn't ask, he asserted, using calculated cruelty, breaking Tuco physically and psychologically until the outlaw, weeping and convulsing, confessed the name of the man, Arch Stanton. Angel Eyes, satisfied but not finished, now focused on Blondie, who had watched the entire brutal display with a stoic, detached intensity. He knew Blondie held the second half of the puzzle. Angel Eyes had his own crew, a band of mercenary thugs he hired for muscle. He ordered them to take Blondie to a secluded, high-security encampment miles away, a desolate stone mission being used as a temporary Confederate prison, where he could be broken down slowly, professionally. Angel Eyes smiled, a cruel, final expression. "I know who has the name, Blondie. But I suspect you have the name of the place. We'll meet again, and when we do, I will have all the names and you nothing." The desert wind howled, carrying Blondie away in a cloud of dust, imprisoned by Angel Eyes' men, leaving Tuco a sobbing, broken mess. He had the first name, and Angel Eyes had the intention of taking everything else. Next time, Blondie must escape a fortress prison. Tuco finds an unexpected ally, and the war closes in on the hunt for the gold. Blondie was taken by Angel Eyes' men to the ruins of San Carlos, a desolate stone mission repurposed by the Confederate Army as a temporary prison and holding facility. The mission was crumbling, its high walls casting long, menacing shadows across the compound, guarded by a detachment of ragged, bitter Confederate troops commanded by a vicious, one-armed sergeant named Stoney. Angel Eyes, before riding off to pursue other leads, had given Stoney clear, brutal instructions. Extract the location of the gold from Blondie using any means necessary. Blondie was thrown into a small, suffocating cell, the air thick with dust and the stench of unwashed bodies. He knew his only value was the secret he held, the name of the cemetery, and the second he revealed it, his life would be forfeit. He maintained his stoic silence, enduring the sergeant's cruel, escalating methods of interrogation, starvation, exposure to the brutal desert sun, and relentless psychological torment, all aimed at cracking his formidable composure. Sergeant Stoney, frustrated by Blondie's unyielding refusal to talk, grew more desperate and erratic. He tried to exploit Blondie's moral sense, parading other prisoners, dying Union soldiers and captured Mexican citizens, and threatening to execute them, but Blondie remained unmoved, his eyes cold and distant. He had calculated the cost. The lives of these few, he reasoned, were the price for the hundreds of lives the gold could indirectly save or doom. The true turning point came when a compassionate, but deeply cynical, Confederate doctor tending to the wounded approached Blondie's cell. The doctor, disgusted by the sergeant's brutality, saw a different kind of man in the prisoner. He slipped Blondie a rough map, drawn on a piece of bloody linen, showing the mission's sewer system and a weak point in the outer wall. "The war is over here," the doctor whispered, his voice heavy with despair, referring to the mission's collapsing integrity. "Save yourself and forget this accursed gold." Blondie studied the map, the faint lines offering a glimmer of hope in the darkness. The escape had to be immediate and silent. He waited for the cover of a massive, brewing thunderstorm, a rare, violent event that would mask the sounds of his movements and scatter the guards. As the first drops of rain began to splatter against the stone walls, Blondie used a rusty spoon he'd hidden to pry loose the mortar around a floor stone, revealing the narrow, fetid tunnel of the sewer below. He plunged into the darkness, the storm's fury overhead serving as his covering artillery. The path was agonizingly slow and claustrophobic, but he knew the moment the storm broke, the guards would check on him. The ultimate test of his escape, however, lay outside the walls. He was unarmed, alone, and surrounded by hundreds of miles of hostile territory and Angel Eyes' vigilant men. If he failed, the sergeant would ensure his death was slow and public. Meanwhile, Tuco, left battered and weeping in the dust by Angel Eyes, had managed to crawl toward the distant sound of battle, clinging to the slim hope of scavenging supplies or perhaps a horse. He stumbled directly into the chaotic retreat of a disorganized, severely beaten Confederate regiment. They were demoralized, hungry, and desperate. Tuco, sensing an opportunity for power and protection, used his fast-talking charm and natural charisma, coupled with exaggerated tales of his supposed past military prowess, to quickly ingratiate himself with the commander, a disillusioned colonel named Mortimer. Colonel Mortimer, weary of the war and suspicious of everyone, initially kept Tuco at arm's length, but Tuco's ability to find water, scrounge food, and motivate the dispirited men soon made him a valuable, if highly suspicious, asset. Their journey became a grueling, tragic march across a battlefield scourged by the war's violence. They passed through burnt-out towns, fields littered with corpses, and streams choked with the bodies of men and animals. Tuco, though fundamentally selfish, felt a fleeting moment of something akin to patriotism and remorse as he witnessed the widespread suffering. He was an outlaw, but the scale of this legalized slaughter sickened even him. Colonel Mortimer, finally lowering his guard during a cold, rainy night, confessed the true nature of his mission. He was tasked with securing the safe passage of the Confederate payroll, a vast sum of gold, which had been stolen by one of his former men, a corporal who had vanished months ago. Tuco's blood ran cold. The description of the corporal perfectly matched Corporal Bill Carson, the man who had died in the desert whispering, "Arch Stanton." Tuco now understood the gravity of the secret he held and the true stakes of the fortune. As they pressed on, the regiment encountered a massive cattle drive, stampeding wildly across the plains, a consequence of a recent Union raid. Amidst the chaos of the 1,000-pounding hooves, Tuco spotted a familiar, distinctive figure on a mule leading the drive, Blondie. He was alive, lean, and utterly focused, having escaped the prison and somehow managed to acquire a new mule and a fresh set of clothes. The sight of his former partner, whom he had left for dead, sparked a renewed surge of hatred and greed in Tuco. He deserted the regiment instantly, commandeering a fast horse and charging through the stampede, his only goal to capture Blondie and extract the other half of the secret. The irony was devastating. Blondie had survived Tuco's betrayal, survived Angel Eyes' prison, and now stood closer than ever to the goal. Tuco spurred his horse on, realizing this was his last chance to regain control of the hunt. Tuco caught up with Blondie on the banks of a roaring, muddy river, where Blondie was resting and observing a strategic bottleneck, a massive, unstable wooden bridge that spanned the perilous current. The bridge was heavily guarded by both Union and Confederate forces, who were engaged in a bitter, ongoing struggle for its control. The bridge was not merely a crossing point, it was the gateway to the territory where the gold was likely buried. Tuco, pulling his stolen revolver, confronted Blondie with a furious barrage of accusations and threats. Blondie, completely unfazed, simply looked out at the raging river and the suicidal firefight over the bridge. "We are partners again, Tuco," Blondie stated flatly, without asking or pleading. "We both know half the secret. The only way across is together." The situation was dire. Neither man could afford to kill the other, as the secret would die with the victim. They were forced, by the necessity of survival and greed, back into their reluctant, toxic partnership. They observed the battle for the bridge, realizing the futility of an outright attack. The Union forces, led by a colonel whose sanity was unraveling under the strain of continuous combat, were desperately trying to hold the bridge, while the Confederates were equally determined to destroy it to halt the Union advance. The constant cannon fire, the smell of gunpowder, and the sight of men dying for a wooden structure served as a grim backdrop to their renewed pact. They needed a plan, and Blondie, ever the tactician, formulated a dangerous one. They would wait for the fighting to reach a crescendo, then destroy the bridge themselves, forcing both armies to disperse and clear the route to the cemetery. That night, as the full moon struggled to pierce the dense, smoky air, Blondie and Tuco ventured close to the bridge, moving like shadows among the dying. They rigged the central supports with explosive charges stolen from a nearby abandoned ammunition wagon. The work was tense, requiring silent coordination, a task that surprisingly their strange, practiced synergy allowed. As they worked, Blondie revealed the second part of the secret, the name of the place, not a person, Sad Hill Cemetery. Tuco, his eyes wide with avarice, repeated the name, etching it into his memory. But before they could ignite the fuses, they were discovered by a small patrol of exhausted Union soldiers. A desperate, silent brawl erupted in the muddy darkness. They managed to subdue the soldiers, but the sound attracted the attention of the main Union force. Blondie quickly lit the fuse, and as they scrambled back, he stared at Tuco, a new look of respect mixed with his perpetual caution in his eyes. The explosion was deafening, a sound that swallowed the war itself. The bridge shattered, sending tons of wood and screaming men into the churning river and clearing the path for the gold. The destruction of the bridge was a temporary, brutal triumph. The sudden, violent end to the stalemate over the river scattered both the Union and Confederate forces, leaving the road ahead open, but also creating a vast, unpredictable swath of territory populated by stragglers, deserters, and opportunists. Blondie and Tuco rode hard, fueled by the adrenaline of their narrow escape and the imminent promise of the gold. They had the location, Sad Hill Cemetery. But the explosion had been heard for miles, and it had drawn the attention of the one man who understood exactly what it signified, Angel Eyes. Angel Eyes, having received the name Arch Stanton from the tortured Tuco, had been meticulously tracking Blondie's movements, convinced that the bounty hunter had been headed toward a specific landmark. The explosion of the bridge confirmed his suspicions. The bounty hunters were no longer running scams. They were clearing obstacles to a major treasure. He immediately intercepted the Union colonel, who was now utterly broken by the loss of his bridge and his men. Angel Eyes, with his effortless psychological manipulation, quickly extracted the full story of the destroyed bridge and the two mysterious figures involved. He confirmed his theory: Blondie and Tuco were headed to a cemetery connected to the gold. Angel Eyes smiled, a thin, chilling expression. He now had the names and the place. He was one step ahead. He assembled his own highly trained, specialized gang, a group of professional killers and trackers, paying them up front in a dazzling display of confidence. They were faster, better equipped, and more disciplined than any ordinary posse. They shadowed Blondie and Tuco, staying just out of sight, letting the two scavengers pave the final route. Blondie and Tuco stopped at a dilapidated, remote farmstead to resupply, believing they had a massive lead. They found the farm abandoned, but a small, carefully placed silver locket on a table caught Blondie's attention. He picked it up, feeling a familiar weight of unease. As he turned, Angel Eyes' lieutenant, a hulking man named Wallace, stepped out of the shadows, flanked by 4 other men, guns drawn. Angel Eyes sends his regards, Blondie, Wallace sneered. He wants to save you the walk. Blondie and Tuco were completely surrounded, their guns uselessly holstered. The angel had caught up, his shadow falling cold and heavy upon them, ensuring the race for the gold would end not at a gravesite, but in a final, deadly confrontation. Blondie and Tuco were disarmed and marched toward a large, ruined mission in the distance. A different one than the San Carlos prison, which Angel Eyes was now using as his staging post. Angel Eyes wanted the capture to be public and humiliating, a clear display of his dominance. When they arrived, Angel Eyes was waiting, impeccably dressed and radiating a lethal calm. He had anticipated their move, their eventual reunion, and their destination. He had already dispatched a fast team to Sad Hill Cemetery to begin the search, but he knew the gold was likely buried under a specific name, and he needed Blondie to confirm the exact gravesite. Angel Eyes subjected them to a final, terrifying confrontation, not with fists or whips, but with cold, calculated words. He taunted Tuco with the memory of the near-hanging and Blondie with the failure of his moral code. Angel Eyes made his chilling proposal. He would spare their lives if Blondie simply told him the specific grave under which the gold was buried, promising them a small, token cut, a promise Blondie knew was a lie. Blondie, maintaining his steely facade, refused, gambling that his silence was more valuable than his life. Angel Eyes, furious but controlled, ordered his men to beat Blondie unconscious, locking him away to think it over. He then focused his final, terrifying attention on Tuco. He did not beat him. Instead, he appealed to Tuco's avarice, offering him a better deal, guide Angel Eyes' search team directly to the grave in exchange for a larger share, enough to live like a king. Tuco, seeing a chance to escape Angel Eyes' wrath and still get rich, seemed to waver, his greed overcoming his fear. As night fell, Tuco, his face a mask of conflict, approached Blondie's cell. Blondie was badly hurt but conscious. "I told him the name, Blondie," Tuco whispered, his voice shaking. "He knows, Arch Stanton. He knows the cemetery. He will kill us both now that he has all the names, even if I guide him." Blondie, through his pain, finally spoke, a low, dangerous tone in his voice. "He has Arch Stanton. He has Sad Hill Cemetery. But I lied to you, Tuco. I never saw the whole message. I know which grave. I know the last name that opens the lock." Blondie then revealed that the secret was triple-locked, requiring a final, third name. "The third name is, only I know it. You kill me, you kill the gold." Angel Eyes, lurking nearby and listening to every word, was momentarily stunned. He now had the two men he needed, but their survival was now tied to the final, crucial name held by Blondie. Angel Eyes, realizing the complexity of the situation, changed his plan. He would take both of them to Sad Hill Cemetery, forcing them to lead him to the gold, or die trying to save it. The three converging lines of greed, cruelty, and survival were finally on their direct, fatal collision course. Next time, the desperate ride to Sad Hill Cemetery, the arrival at the enormous graveyard, and the setup for the legendary three-way standoff. The fragile, deadly truce was struck in the pre-dawn hours. Angel Eyes, his face a mask of cold fury, had Blondie and Tuco bound and mounted on horses, flanked by his entire heavily armed gang. The air was thick with unspoken threats and the grim promise of violence. Angel Eyes had no intention of keeping any promises. He merely needed them alive long enough to dig up the gold. Blondie, still bruised and in pain, maintained his defiant silence, his eyes scanning the horizon for any opportunity, any weakness in their formidable captors. Tuco, caught between his fear of Angel Eyes and his burning desire for the gold, rode in a state of agitated terror, constantly glancing at Blondie, then at the hard faces of their guards. The war, though somewhat dispersed after the bridge's destruction, still cast a long shadow, forcing them to take circuitous routes, avoiding Union patrols and Confederate stragglers alike. Their journey to Sad Hill Cemetery was a brutal, relentless march across a desolate landscape. Days blurred into a weary rhythm of riding, snatched meals, and tense, silent nights under the vast, uncaring desert sky. Angel Eyes, ever the strategist, pushed them relentlessly, ensuring they had no opportunity for escape or communication. He would ride alongside Blondie, his voice a low, venomous hiss, trying to pry the final secret from him, but Blondie remained an unbreakable enigma. Tuco, meanwhile, was treated with a mixture of contempt and careful supervision. Angel Eyes knew the outlaw's volatility and kept a close watch, assigning two of his most brutal men, the menacing brothers Jed and Silas, to guard him directly. As they rode, the landscape slowly began to shift. The harsh, rocky plains gave way to a more undulating terrain, dotted with scrub brush and gnarled, ancient trees. The air grew heavier, the silence deeper. Then, on the distant horizon, they saw it, a massive, sprawling necropolis, a city of the dead stretching as far as the eye could see. Sad Hill Cemetery. It was unlike any graveyard either Blondie or Tuco had ever witnessed, a vast, desolate expanse of crude wooden crosses, many tilted or broken, marking thousands of forgotten graves. It was a testament to the immense, anonymous casualties of the Civil War, and now, it was to be the stage for their final, desperate play. Angel Eyes spurred his horse forward, a predatory glint in his eyes. He had arrived. The gold was almost within his grasp, and his two reluctant guides would soon serve their final purpose. The sheer scale of Sad Hill Cemetery was overwhelming. Thousands upon thousands of unmarked graves stretched across the undulating hills, each marked by a simple wooden cross, a stark monument to the countless lives lost in the unforgiving war. The wind whispered through the tall, dry grass, creating an eerie, mournful sigh that echoed the sorrow of the place. Angel Eyes' men, dismounting, began to spread out, their initial bravado quickly turning to frustration as they realized the daunting task of finding a specific grave in this labyrinth of death. Blondie, his face unreadable, took in the scene. He knew the general area but needed Tuco's memory of the Arch Stanton name to pinpoint the exact section. Tuco, for his part, was visibly unnerved by the graveyard's immensity, his usual bluster replaced by a nervous, darting gaze. Angel Eyes, recognizing the immensity of the task, divided his men, ordering them to systematically search section by section, starting with the oldest markers. He kept Blondie and Tuco under his direct supervision, knowing they held the key. He set up a temporary camp at the highest point of the cemetery, where he could oversee the entire, desperate search. The sun beat down mercilessly, adding to the grim atmosphere. Hours crawled by, filled with the scratching sound of shovels hitting dry earth, the occasional shout of a frustrated digger, and the oppressive silence of the dead. Blondie watched, calculated, and waited. He knew the crucial piece of information he held, the specific grave under the Arch Stanton marker, was his only bargaining chip, his only chance of survival. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, a chilling sound echoed across the cemetery, a lone bugle playing taps. It came from a nearby ridge, where a small detachment of Union cavalry, having tracked the activity, had arrived, setting up their own reconnaissance post. The war had followed them, even to this sanctuary of the dead. Angel Eyes cursed, realizing their presence. He ordered his men to dig faster, to secure the gold before the Union forces could intervene. Tuco, seeing the Union soldiers, a glimmer of hope sparked in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold stare of Jed and Silas. The cemetery was becoming a cage, the walls slowly closing in. Blondie, seeing the converging forces, knew his final gambit had to be played soon. The stage was set, the players assembled, and the gold, buried beneath the desolate crosses, waited for its bloody claimants. The night at Sad Hill was a symphony of tension. The distant sounds of the Union bugle and the crackle of their campfires served as a constant reminder of the encroaching external threat. Angel Eyes, growing increasingly impatient and paranoid, had ordered his men to work through the night, illuminating the digging sites with flickering lanterns, creating an eerie, spectral glow across the cemetery. He knew time was running out. He approached Blondie, his voice barely a whisper, a steel edge beneath the calm. "Tell me the grave, Blondie. Give me the last name, and I will let you live. Refuse, and your last breath will be on this cursed ground." Blondie, still maintaining his poker face, finally spoke. "I'll tell you the exact grave, Angel Eyes. But not for your promise. For a share of the gold, and for the life of Tuco." Angel Eyes paused, considering. He knew Blondie held the key. He agreed, a cruel smile playing on his lips, knowing full well he would betray them both the moment the gold was unearthed. Blondie, with deliberate slowness, finally revealed the full secret. He told them that the gold was indeed under the name Arch Stanton, but within that section of the cemetery, it was under a specific, unmarked grave, right next to a cross bearing the name Unknown. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the detail that would lead them directly to the fortune. Angel Eyes immediately dispatched Tuco, under heavy guard, to the Arch Stanton section of the cemetery, ordering him to point out the specific, unknown grave Blondie had described. Tuco, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and frenzied greed, led the way, his heart pounding. As he reached the approximate area, he began to scan the ground frantically. The countless crosses blurred, and the moon offered little clarity. He needed to find the specific, unknown grave Blondie had mentioned, the one nestled beside a particular cross marked Arch Stanton. Finally, his gaze fixed on a small, weather-beaten cross. Next to it, almost invisible in the gloom, was a mound of earth, devoid of any marker. "There!" Tuco shouted, his voice hoarse with excitement. The unknown grave. This is it. Angel Eyes nodded, a cold satisfaction spreading across his features. The gold was within their grasp. He ordered his men to start digging immediately, and as the shovels bit into the earth, Blondie was marched toward the site, a solitary, dangerous figure, ready for his final, desperate gambit. The air crackled with a palpable tension as the first shovel hit something solid beneath the unknown grave. Angel Eyes' men dug with frantic energy, spurred on by the promise of untold riches. Angel Eyes stood over them, his revolver drawn, watching every move, his gaze flickering between the digging men, Blondie and Tuco. Blondie, his hands casually resting near his holstered, empty revolver, surveyed the scene with a chilling calm. He knew this was the moment. His life depended on a perfectly timed, audacious bluff. Tuco, meanwhile, was a coiled spring of nerves, his eyes wide with avarice and fear, constantly shifting between the gold and Angel Eyes' watchful gaze. Suddenly, Blondie reached down and pulled out a small, flat rock from the dirt near his foot. He began to polish it with his thumb, his movements slow and deliberate. "You know, Angel Eyes," Blondie drawled, his voice cutting through the sounds of digging, "there's two kinds of people in this world. Those who have a loaded gun, and those who dig. You dig." Angel Eyes, momentarily startled by the unexpected taunt, narrowed his eyes, his finger tightening on his trigger. The digging stopped, and all eyes turned to Blondie. It was a challenge, an open declaration of intent. Blondie knew Angel Eyes had disarmed him, but he also knew the hitman's fatal flaw, his overconfidence and his belief that he had stripped Blondie of all his power. Just as Angel Eyes made a move, Blondie, with lightning speed, kicked a small, concealed pistol from the dirt next to the unknown grave. A pistol he had meticulously hidden days before during his capture, during one of the brief, chaotic moments when the storm had erupted at the prison. It was an old, rusty Navy Colt, but it was loaded and lethal. He scooped it up, his thumb cocking the hammer with an audible click, pointing it directly at Angel Eyes. At the same exact moment, Tuco, seeing his opportunity, tackled one of Angel Eyes' men, grabbing his dropped rifle. The cemetery erupted into chaos. Angel Eyes, momentarily surprised, still managed to level his own pistol. A deadly, three-way standoff was born in the heart of the graveyard. Blondie, Angel Eyes, and Tuco, the good, the bad, and the ugly, each with a gun now aimed at the others, the hidden gold lying just beneath their feet. The air was thick with gunpowder, dust, and the final, brutal silence of impending death. The standoff in the clearing was a tableau of frozen violence, each man locked in a deadly triangulation. Blondie, his newly acquired revolver steady, faced Angel Eyes. Tuco, wild-eyed and clutching a rifle he barely knew how to use, aimed it shakily at Blondie, but his gaze kept darting to the half-buried chest. Angel Eyes, ever the professional, aimed his pistol squarely at Blondie's heart, his face a mask of cold, predatory calculation. The tension was suffocating, stretched to breaking point by the knowledge that a single twitch, a single breath, could trigger an avalanche of gunfire. The gold, now clearly visible in a half-unearthed wooden chest, glimmered in the pale moonlight, a silent, powerful magnet drawing all their greed and desperation. The gold, Blondie, Angel Eyes finally hissed, his voice like ice. "Where is the rest of it? What's the catch?" Blondie, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips, spoke clearly. "There are three names here, Angel Eyes. You have Arch Stanton and the unknown grave. But the real treasure is buried under the cross marked Blondie." Tuco, hearing his own name, let out a confused, furious yell, his rifle wavering. Angel Eyes' eyes narrowed, a flicker of doubt, then suspicion, then understanding, passing through them. He realized Blondie was playing a final, dangerous mind game, making himself the ultimate target. As the standoff intensified, Blondie, with a sudden, decisive motion, fired his pistol, not at either man, but at the rope dangling from a small, rickety gallows he had assembled nearby, a morbid prop he'd quickly fashioned from some broken crosses and a piece of rope from the dig. The shot echoed, sharp and final. Tuco, startled, involuntarily shifted his aim. In that split second, Blondie swiftly turned his pistol on Angel Eyes, firing a single, precise shot. Angel Eyes gasped, a surprised look on his face, before collapsing to the ground, his eyes wide and vacant. He was dead before he hit the earth. Tuco, momentarily stunned, instinctively aimed his rifle at Blondie, but Blondie, with a cool, calculating gaze, slowly pulled back the hammer of his own revolver, aiming it directly at Tuco. I said there were 3 names, Tuco. And it was under the name Blondie where I chose to put my share. The rest is for you under Arch Stanton's grave. Tuco, realizing Blondie was giving him a choice, looked from the loaded gun to the still buried chest. Blondie, having asserted his absolute dominance, forced Tuco to dig out his own share of the gold from the Arch Stanton grave, which was significantly smaller than Blondie's. With Tuco's gold secured, Blondie then, with a final, ironic flourish, placed a noose around Tuco's neck, just like their old scam. This time, he tied the rope to the branch of a gnarled old tree, forcing Tuco onto a precarious wooden cross. There's 2 kinds of people, Tuco, Blondie said, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. Those who walk away with the gold, and those who are left hanging. Blondie took his share, the large chest filled with Confederate gold, and rode off, leaving Tuco dangling precariously, cursing and struggling, his legs kicking at the cross. Blondie paused, looked back, and with a final, enigmatic smile, shot the rope, just as he always did. Tuco fell to the ground, bruised and furious, but alive. Blondie rode off into the setting sun, his silhouette disappearing into the vast, unforgiving Wild West. Their strange, violent, and utterly unforgettable partnership was finally, ambiguously over, leaving Tuco to ponder his freedom, his meager gold, and the enduring legend of the man in the poncho.